When you hear the name Jeffrey Dahmer, it's easy to just think of the monster, right? The horrific details of his crimes. But today, we're going to look beyond that. We're digging into the story behind the headlines, the story of how our own society, our own institutions, failed so badly that they let a killer operate right under their noses for more than a decade.
You know this one phrase? It just nails it. The Jeffrey Dahmer story isn't just about one deeply disturbed man. It's about a whole chain of failures, a pattern of neglect that had absolutely devastating consequences. And that's the lens we need to use to really understand what happened here.
All right, so to really get how this all went so wrong, we've got to set the stage first. Who was Jeffrey Dahmer, and what did the timeline of these events actually look like?
Okay, look at this timeline. You can see his early life was marked by real distress and isolation that nobody really addressed. But the part that should make you stop and think is the length of his active period, 1978 to 1991. That's 13 years. 13 years. That huge gap of time is so central to understanding the massive failures we're about to get into.
And this is absolutely crucial. Dahmer's victims weren't just chosen at random. They were almost all from marginalized communities. We're talking about young men of color, gay men, people who are homeless. This vulnerability isn't some side detail. It's the very core of why he got away with it for so long.
So knowing who he targeted is really key to understanding the psychology behind it all. This wasn't just random, chaotic violence. No, it was driven by a very specific and, frankly, a very dark psychological need for complete and total control. According to the psychological analyses, what was driving him was this profound, all-consuming fear of abandonment. This wasn't about becoming famous or infamous. It was a completely twisted, obsessive desire to have total control over another person, to make absolutely sure they could never, ever leave him. And you can see that fear in everything he did. The horrific nature of his crimes all served this one single goal: to create a completely dependent, incapacitated person who would be physically unable to leave him. It's a chilling glimpse into a mind that was laser-focused on one thing: possession.
So, was he insane? Well, this is where it gets really complicated. Legally, the court said, nope, you are sane, you knew what you were doing was wrong, and you're responsible. But on the other hand, the psychologists were pointing to severe personality disorders and something called paraphilic disorders. This case lives in that really murky gray area between legal sanity and profound mental illness.
But here's the thing. If we only focus on Dahmer's psychology, we miss the bigger picture. We miss the story of repeated systemic failures from the very institutions that were supposed to protect people.
And this is the question that just hangs over this entire case, isn't it? With so many victims over so many years, how was this even possible? Why were the alarm bells that were ringing so loudly just ignored? I mean, just look at this. It's staggering. Neighbors called police over and over again about the horrible smell coming from his apartment. The police themselves actually ran into Dahmer on multiple occasions. And then there's the most infamous incident. In May 1991, they found a distressed, naked 14-year-old boy, Konarak synthesophone, who had escaped. They believed Dahmer's story that it was just a lover's quarrel, and they literally handed the boy back to him. He was killed just a short time later. These weren't subtle clues. They were bright, flashing red lights.
So why were they all missed? Well, the analysis points to this really grim combination of factors. Because the victims were from marginalized communities, their disappearances just didn't get the same attention. You had deep-seated homophobia and racial bias baked into the institutions, so when police did show up, they saw things through a prejudiced lens, dismissing a kidnapping as a domestic spat. It all points to a massive failure in police training and a much bigger, systemic neglect of these communities. So when we look back, what's the real legacy of this case? It's not about some mastermind criminal. It's about the lessons we have to learn from this profound failure.
Let's be really clear about something. Dahmer wasn't some brilliant phantom hiding in the shadows. His neighbors knew something was wrong. The police had encountered him. He wasn't invisible. He was hiding in plain sight.
No, the real story here, the one that should stick with us, is that this is a damning indictment of the system itself. It's an indictment of a society that failed to see, failed to listen, and ultimately failed to act.
This quote just says it all, doesn't it? The victims and all the warnings that came with them were simply not seen as a priority. Their lives, their safety were devalued. And the consequences of that were just catastrophic.
At the end of the day, the Dahmer case is this powerful, haunting reminder. It shows us the real-world cost of dismissing vulnerable people, of ignoring the signs of extreme isolation, and of letting our own biases blind us to the danger that is right in front of our faces.
And that leaves us with a pretty tough question to ask ourselves. The world looks different now than it did in the early 90s, sure, but those core problems of bias and neglect, they haven't just disappeared. So you have to wonder, whose cries for help are we ignoring now? What warnings are we deprioritizing today?